Courtship Through the Ages by James Thurber. Surely nothing in the astonishing scheme of life can have nonplussed nature so much as the fact that none of the females of any of the species she created really cared very much for the male as such. For the past 10 million years, nature has been busily inventing ways to make the male attractive to the female. But the whole business of courtship, from the marine annelids up to man, still lumbers heavily along like a complicated musical comedy. I have been reading the sad and absorbing story in Volume 6, Colta Dama, of the Encyclopedia Britannica. In this volume you can learn all about cricket, cotton, costume designing, crocodiles, crown jewels, and Coleridge, but none of these subjects is so interesting as the courtship of animals, which recounts the sorrowful lengths to which all males must go to arouse the interest of a lady. We all know, I think, that nature gave man whiskers and a mustache, with the quaint idea in mind that these would prove attractive to the female. We all know that, far from attracting her, whiskers and mustaches only made her nervous and gloomy, so that man had to go in for somersaults, tilting with lances, and performing feats of parlor magic to win her attention. He also had to bring her candy, flowers, and the furs of animals. It is common knowledge that in spite of all these love displays, the male is constantly being turned down, insulted, or thrown out of the house. It is rather comforting, then, to discover that the peacock, for all his gorgeous plumage, does not have a particularly easy time in courtship. None of the males in the world do. The first peahen, it turned out, was only faintly stirred by her suitor's beautiful train. She would often go quietly to sleep while he was whisking it around. The Britannica tells us that the peacock actually had to learn a certain little trick to wake her up and revive her interest. He had to learn to vibrate his quills so as to make a rustling sound. In ancient times, man himself, observing the ways of the peacock, probably tried vibrating his whiskers to make a rustling sound. If so, it didn't get him anywhere. He had to go in for something else. So, among other things, he went in for gifts. It is not unlikely that he got this idea from certain flies and birds who were making no headway at all with rustling sounds. One of the flies of the family Empidae, who had tried everything, finally hit on something pretty special. He contrived to make a glistening, transparent balloon which was even larger than himself. Into this he would put sweetmeats and tidbits, and he would carry the whole elaborate envelope through the air to the lady of his choice. This amused her for a time, but she finally got bored with it. She demanded silly little colorful presents, something that you couldn't eat, but that would look nice around the house. So the male Empis had to go around gathering flower petals and pieces of bright paper to put into his balloon. On a courtship flight, a male Empis cuts quite a figure now, but he can hardly be said to be happy. He never knows how soon the female will demand heavier presents, such as Roman coins and gold collar buttons. It seems probable that one day the courtship of the Empidae will fall down, as man's occasionally does, of its own weight. The bowerbird is another creature that spends so much time courting the female that he never gets any work done. If all the male bowerbirds became nervous wrecks within the next 10 or 15 years, it would not surprise me. The female bowerbird insists that a playground be built for her with a specially constructed bower at the entrance. This bower is much more elaborate than an ordinary nest and is harder to build. It costs a lot more, too. The female will not come to the playground until the male has filled it up with a great many gifts: silvery leaves, red leaves, rose petals, shells, beads, berries, bones, dice, buttons, cigar bands, Christmas seals, and the Lord knows what else. When the female finally condescends to visit the playground, she is in a coy and silly mood and has to be chased in and out of the bower and up and down the playground before she will quit giggling and stand still long enough even to shake hands. The male bird is, of course, pretty well done in before the chase starts because he has worn himself out hunting for eyeglass lenses and begonia blossoms. I imagine that many a bower bird, after chasing a female for 2 or 3 hours, throws up its hands and goes home to bed. Next day, of course, he telephones someone else, and the same trying ritual is gone through again. A male bowerbird is as exhausted as a nightclub habitué before he is out of his 20s. The male fiddler crab has a somewhat easier time, but it can hardly be said that he is sitting pretty. He has one enormously large and powerful claw, usually brilliantly colored, and you might suppose that all he had to do was reach out and grab some passing cutie. The very earliest fiddler crabs may have tried this, but if so, they got slapped for their pains. A female fiddler crab will not tolerate any caveman stuff. She never has, and she doesn't intend to start now. To attract a female, a fiddler crab has to stand on tiptoe and brandish his claw in the air. If any female in the neighborhood is interested, and you'd be surprised how many are not, she comes over and engages him in light badinage, for which he is not in the mood. As many as 100 females may pass the time of day with him and go on about their business. By nightfall of an average courting day, a fiddler crab who has been standing on tiptoe for 8 or 10 hours waving a heavy claw in the air is in pretty sad shape. As in the case of the males of all species, however, he gets out of bed next morning, dashes some water on his face, and tries again. The next time you encounter a male web-spinning spider, stop and reflect that he is too busy worrying about his love life to have any desire to bite you. Male web-spinning spiders have a tougher life than any other males in the animal kingdom. This is because the female web-spinning spiders have very poor eyesight. If a male lands on a female's web, she kills him before he has time to lay down his cane and gloves, mistaking him for a fly or a bumblebee who has stumbled into her trap. Before the species figured out what to do about this, millions of males were murdered by ladies they called on. It is the nature of spiders to perform a little dance in front of the female, but before a male spinner could get near enough for the female to see who he was and what he was up to, she would lash out at him with a flat iron or a pair of garden shears. One night, nobody knows when, a very bright male spinner lay awake worrying about calling on a lady who had been killing suitors right and left. It came to him that this business of dancing as a love display wasn't getting anybody anywhere except the grave. He decided to go in for web twitching or strand vibrating. The next day he tried it on one of the nearsighted girls. Instead of dropping in on her suddenly, he stayed outside the web and began monkeying with one of the strands. He twitched it up and down and in and out with such a lilting rhythm that the female was charmed. The serenade worked beautifully. The female let him live. The Britannica's spider watchers, however, report that this system is not always successful. Once in a while, even now, a female will fire 3 bullets into a suitor or run him through with a kitchen knife. She keeps threatening him from the moment he strikes the first low notes on the outside strings, but usually by the time he has got up to the high notes played around the center of the web, he is going to town and she spares his life. Even the butterfly, as handsome a fellow as he is, can't always win a mate merely by fluttering around and showing off. Many butterflies have to have scent scales on their wings. Hepelius carries a powder puff in a perfumed pouch. He throws perfume at the ladies when they pass. The male tree cricket, Oecanthus, goes Hepelius one better by carrying a tiny bottle of wine with him and giving drinks to such doxies as he has designs on. One of the male snails throws darts to entertain the girls. So it goes through the long list of animals, from the bristleworm and his rudimentary dance steps to man and his gift of diamonds and sapphires. The golden-eyed drake raises a jet of water with his feet as he flies over a lake. Hippias has his powder puff, Oecanthus his wine bottle, man his etchings. It is a bright and melancholy story, the age-old desire of the male for the female, the age-old desire of the female to be amused and entertained. Of all the creatures on earth, the only males who could be figured as putting any irony into their courtship are the grebes and certain other diving birds. Every now and then a courting grebe slips quietly down to the bottom of a lake and then, with a mighty whoosh, pops out suddenly a few feet from his girlfriend, splashing water all over her. She seems to be persuaded that this is a purely loving display, but I like to think that the grebe always has a faint hope of drowning her or scaring her to death. I will close this investigation into the mournful burdens of the male with the Britannica story about a certain Argus pheasant. It appears that the Argus displays himself in front of a female who stands perfectly still without moving a feather. If you saw June Moon some years ago and remember the scene in which the songwriter sang Montana Moon to his grim and motionless wife, you have some idea of what the female Argus probably thinks of her mate's display. The male Argus the Britannica tells about was confined in a cage with a female of another species, a female who kept moving around, emptying ashtrays and fussing with lampshades all the time the male was showing off his talents. Finally, in disgust, he stalked away and began displaying in front of his water trough. He reminds me of a certain male, Homo sapiens, of my acquaintance, who one night after dinner asked his wife to put down her detective magazine so that he could read her a poem of which he was very fond. She sat quietly enough until he was well into the middle of the thing, intoning with great ardor and intensity. Then suddenly there came a sharp, disconcerting slap. It turned out that all during the male's display the female had been intent on a circling mosquito and had finally trapped it between the palms of her hands. The male in this case did not stalk away and display in front of a water trough. He went over to Tim's and had a flock of drinks and recited the poem to the fellas. I am sure they all told bitter stories of their own about how their displays had been interrupted by females. I am also sure that they all ended up by singing, "Honey, honey, bless your heart."